All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started with our introductions. Thank you everyone for tuning in to BRIC's Animation, Visual Effects, and Gaming Pre-Apprenticeship Speaker Series. I'm Sarah, I'm BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator. And the speaker series from the BRIC Foundation aims to give you an inside look at the careers and inner workings of the animation, visual effects, and gaming industries. Today, we're really excited to give you an inside look at look development with our guest, Lorin here, who is an asset supervisor and look dev lead herself. She'll show us how the use of look development can help visually drive a story, what successful assets are, and how the iterative process works in animation pipelines. We welcome any questions you might have along the way. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so make sure to use that to make sure that we don't lose track of any of your questions. So feel free to ask any questions along the way. We'll also host a Q&A during the last 15 minutes of the session as well. So please submit any questions you might have for Lorin along the way. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lorin.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Lorin Pillay. I'm an asset supervisor and senior look development artist. I have worked in all corners of the industry. I've worked in animation, VFX, games, commercials, you name it. I spent the majority of my career at DreamWorks Animation. I've also spent several years at Nickelodeon. I've worked on Disney Plus and Marvel Productions and a whole bunch of others as well. So I've done everything, like I mentioned. I've worked on feature films. I've worked on a lot of episodic animation, several hundred episodes of episodic animation, VFX live action episodic. So that's like live action TV shows with lots of VFX integrated into them, which are really high budget television shows. I've shipped 3 games as an environment artist and worked on different kinds of commercials that integrate VFX into them. So what does a look dev artist do? Look development artists are given a grayscale model from modeling. So it comes to us ready for textures, and they look approximately like this, depending on the working setup. This is what we call A pose. So characters are delivered in either A pose or T pose with arms straight out, ready for us to add our paint to. So this represents adding a paint pass. This is just texture on the surface. So we see lots of brush strokes and paint strokes, depending on what the look of the show is, we will do our texturing pass. But look development artists don't just do the texturing. We also do the shader work. So you can see the before and after here. So this would be just the paint on the surface. And then this is with the shaders applied. This is giving us the sheen on the skin, the quality of the fabric, how bumpy is something, how shiny. Does the light penetrate the skin using subsurface scattering? If you hold your hand up to a light and you see the light coming through it, that's subsurface scattering. So look development artists do all of that. And in that sense, we are working directly with lighting because those surface qualities are going to be seen when we really get the character or asset into lighting. Look development can be anything from hyper stylized. So this is Voltron, and we can see there are painted details along the edges of the character. All of the machined parts have painting to them, but primarily this show is shader driven. This is a very technical aspect of the look development process. This is giving it a toon look while using the artistic skills of painting to get that edge wear. So it can also be very painterly. This is an example of really relying more on the paint pass rather than on the shaders to do the work. So you can see heavy painting done on that one. This is an example of stylized with high detail. So we see a lot more detail on the surface, but we haven't approached realism yet. It's still very clearly a cartoon, excuse me. It's still very clearly a cartoon. It's a stylized look, but has a lot of detail on the surface. We see the bumps protruding on the skin. This is something that look development artists do. We develop how bumpy something is. We use several different processes called normal maps and displacement maps, and those actually give deformation to the surface of the model that were delivered. This is an example of what we deliver as look development artists. So we do a lot of turntables. When we are working on an asset, it is mid-production. They're not in animation yet, or they might be preparing to go to animation. So we're working on the assets when they are static, and we deliver turntables to get approvals. This is an example of doing an alternate shader pass. So on the scenes before, we saw the dragon without any extra glows or anything like that. So this is very common, where we sometimes have variants depending on the needs of the show. This character would go into a bioluminescent mode. So that would be all on the look development artist. We develop the character for its standard look. And for specialized looks. So here he's got this edge glow, which is reactive depending on the direction that he's facing. That is all shader driven and developed by the look dev artist specifically. This is another example of high detail, but still a not realistic look. So these are the raptors from Jurassic World, Camp Cretaceous. And the interesting thing about being a look dev artist is a lot of times we get the opportunity for ownership on an asset, but look development is a team. So there are several look dev artists on any given show. And sometimes you've got to be able to hand off a file to a coworker to have them pick up a portion of it. So while I did do the majority of the raptors, there are portions of them where a coworker stepped in because of timing or other production needs. And so I would hand off portions. For instance, a coworker of mine worked on the talons. So adding some more detail and getting that a little bit further. Another coworker added some detail into the face. As we get notes on an asset, somebody needs to pick that work up. So ideally, we get to have ownership and do the whole project, but sometimes we've got to hand off and work together as a team in order to achieve the needs of the show. Look development can also mean it's something that's super realistic or hyper real. So this would be an example of, obviously this is a sci-fi show, but we're using all real world textures. This is working from photo source textures and then adding a lot of details on top, really pushing the look of the grittiness. In this case, this world is supposed to feel like a very wet, very gritty world. And so it's adding a lot of grime onto realistic textures. So if we look at the texture of this trench right here, we can see a lot of variation that's happening within the metal panels. This is all developed through look development. This can mean everything from the buildings to the terrain to the characters themselves. every aspect of this shot in particular is all CG. And this one as well. So everything that you see in frame is all CG. Everything had to be look developed. So the trench, the spaceships, the background buildings, the bridges, all of these were grayscale models until they fall into the look development department. Many look development artists handle all assets. I myself, on every team that I've worked on so far, have been like this, where I am doing characters, environments, and props. So at any given time, I have to be prepared to switch gears to work on something very different. But there are teams that do separate their look development artists based on the assets that they work on. There might be a character team that focuses solely on the characters of the show or the movie. And there might be environment artists. So usually in that case, there would be two separate teams, characters and environments, and the props then get separated based on the type of prop that they are. If it is a prop that is handled directly by a character, it would then go to the character team. And if it's a prop that populates an environment, it then goes to the environment team. So this would be an example of where I was both a character artist and an environment artist, working on the environments of this movie and the characters. So all of these buildings had to be look developed, and a lot of work was put into this building right here. We have to be prepared to sometimes do very high resolution work that is going to be seen very close up, because context matters. Sometimes an asset might only be seen from mid distance or far away. And so we'll then make different choices depending on how it's going to be seen. In this case, it was a very close up asset. We were going to be seeing it from close up in several shots. So that had to be taken into account when the texturing process was happening. Another example of environment work. So all of this is a combination of CG assets that were fully textured and matte painting. So in this case, a lot of these buildings here are not actually CG in scene. They are part of a matte painting. So here is what we call a locked off shot. The camera is static, it stays put, so we're not moving the camera around, and only some assets within the scene are moving to show that life happening. Same thing here. We have basically a static camera, but a slow push in. Right here, it's just a very tiny amount of motion. There's a lot of that in this show. If you really take a look and see how the camera work is done, the camera motions are very, very slow and deliberate. And all of this is an example of working with live action. This is doing CG integration into a live action plate. So this shot right here, this is all real. The people are real. This building down here is real. But this part up here, everything above this roof line, this is all done with CG. One slightly confusing thing about being a look development artist is there are multiple titles that could be used interchangeably for this job role. So I have been called a texture painter, a surfacing artist, a shader artist. They all fall under the same umbrella. Now, if you are called specifically a texture painter, that might mean you aren't working on the shaders. It really just depends on the job. So different studios can handle things differently where they may separate things out. But for myself, in most of the jobs that I've worked on, I've done the whole from start to finish look development process where I'm doing the texturing to the shader development to the renders to prepare to go into lighting. But one important distinction is that visual development is not look development. So you might see when you start to kind of look at what's available in the industry, different job roles, you might sometimes see something for a viz dev artist or visual development. Visual development is something more like this. This is the early pre-production work before an asset is made. It's doing design work in 2D, sometimes in 3D as well, but the 3D is not final. But it's used to create the artwork that will populate the show. And these designs are what go through to get approved for how the show will be developed. What this means is that when these come to us as look development artists, this art has already been approved. This is what the look of the show is going to be. So we have to keep this in mind. We have to keep the needs of the show. As look development artists, sometimes we get to be really creative and come up with some really great ideas for how we could approach something. But other times, what we need to do is to keep the needs of the show in mind. In this case, in this made-up example, this table is already developed. This is what it will look like. This is the material that the visual development artist has called out for what the table will use. We then, as look development artists, need to implement it and make it look as close to this artwork as possible to get that final approval, because this artwork has already gone through executive approval. It's already gone through all of the different paces for them to determine what an asset should look like. So while we do get the opportunity to be creative, sometimes we have to remind ourselves needs of the show. We've got to develop our CG art to look approximately or as close to the approved artwork as possible. So in this case, with the raptors, I worked on the early development of these raptors, and we went through many iterations of it because CG art in production is an iterative process. Sometimes we are finding the look of the show and we are delivering these renders in order to get final approval. So we went through a lot of that with these raptors. There was a lot of back and forth as to what the final look should be. In this case, I did get the opportunity to submit my ideas and to voice what I think we could do to some extent. So there are opportunities to really inject your own ideas and own creativity. It really just depends. And it's about learning how to read the room and understand when there's an opportunity to put your ideas in there, to take the opportunity. But sometimes we have to keep the needs of the show in mind and develop the artwork as it was given from the visual development artist. And again, this was kind of the same thing where this was done on the early side. We didn't have a lot of pre-production art. We had some, we definitely had guidance. For instance, I think I had maybe 1 or 2 2D paintings of what the dragon should look like. But as far as how the bumps would really look, how certain things were going to translate, we had some leeway there. So it was early in the development process with this one. So there was some opportunity for me to get creative and to do some of my own ideas in order to bring life into the character. The artist may sometimes need to adjust their work or redo things depending on the note. So this is especially true with these ones because there was some opportunity to do some different things. It meant that we were going to go back several times. We try something, we see how it's received, we see what the notes are, and then we go back and we try something different depending on what they say. So it's about what we say is not being married to your work. It's giving this space for it to have changes and to not think that it's the way that something has to be, because we are working together as a whole team to create a show. So a lot of times that does mean having the open-mindedness to go back, to try something again, to ingest their notes, and to try a different approach. Early versions of this Raptor were very different. We tried a graphic stylized version with really strong looking stripes and all kinds of different things. So it was only through that open-mindedness that we were able to explore what it could look like. And again, there was a lot of back and forth actually about the glow around the edge, how far the glow should reach around the character. Notes are a big part of the process. It is very, very iterative. So it's important as an artist in production to get accustomed to someone giving you notes. When you're early in your career or when you're just getting started, it can be a very uncomfortable thing because you could feel like your art in particular is being criticized. It's a critique, not a criticism. It's about what you can do to make it better or hit the needs of the show for a different reason. There are sometimes different reasons that we as artists don't know about based on the story. There could be something that happens in the story where they specifically need something art related in the character. Let's say he's got some, for example, it's not true in this case, but let's say he's got some damage to his shoulder and he's missing some scales. That's most likely story related, because in look development, story is always first. This is important to think about when you're even working on your own projects. If you're working on something small and simple, think about the story. Was this an old object that was dropped repeatedly? Where would it have been hit if it was dropped? What does that damage look like? Story is very important because although I said we are not the visual development artists in terms of title, we are visually telling a story. It is a visual storytelling medium. We are doing an aspect of the storytelling process that doesn't need any words. It uses what the asset looks like in order to visually tell the viewer what has happened to this asset. Is it brand new? Is it old? What has it been through before the viewer ever saw the asset on screen? And like I was talking about the notes, sometimes the job is the notes because iteration is a common daily process. If you've ever heard the term dailies, this is why we have dailies. We look at footage, we look at what's been submitted from the day before, and we take a look at where we're at and we receive the notes in a very broad sense. There could be notes based on another department, and then your department comes up for notes, and they might call out something that you didn't even see. So the iteration process is very important in order to hit that final visual bar that everybody is striving for together. Look development artists are problem solvers. So look development artists don't just do the painting side of things. Sometimes things come up in production that are not expected. This happens very, very frequently with CG, where you try to do something and something doesn't work as expected, or there's something not accounted for, and we as a team have to come up with a way to fix the problem. Look development is a fantastic place to flex your problem-solving skills. So as an example, this right here, I did a lot of work on this blimp. And this is the blimp early in the shot before anything, let's say, goes wrong. So this is based loosely on a World War II blimp. For this asset, I had to do a lot of studying. And also we needed the blimp to look like it was deflating, because as it starts flying, it starts losing pressure in the main fuselage here. And then it crashes. So we needed to come up with a way for it to look like it was losing pressure in there. And that's where I had an opportunity to do that. There wasn't, let's say, budget in this case. They didn't want to do a process that would have been very, very technical, very time consuming. We needed to just get a subtle effect. So I came up with a plan to do this in look development, where there was a deformation to the sides that just rippled through. We were able to handle that all with look development with the shaders. And that was all that we needed. So it was a great chance for me to use some problem solving skills in order to solve that problem for my production. This has happened on most productions that I've worked on, where there has been something that comes up where we can solve that problem with look development. So it's a really good thing to polish those skills, to get used to problem solving, because there are always things that arise in CG creation where something unexpected happens, or you've got to find a workaround. Workarounds are very important into getting the final shot. Look dev artists study everything. So in this example, this was from the earlier artwork that I showed here. So let's say I'm delivered this artwork from the VizDev or CG or the early art production team. I then have to figure out, okay, how does this actually look in real life? Now, it would be a cartoony table, but we want it to feel like wood. So I would then do a small amount of studying, looking at real pictures of wood tables. What does the grain look like on the end of the piece? What direction does the grain go for each plank? How are they assembled? Take a look at the base and how those join together. All of these things are very important in making an asset feel like it actually belongs in the room, in the scene. Taking a look at where those wear patterns are. They're going to be on the most protruding edges. We've got nicks and scrapes along here. So it's very important as an artist to always be willing to study your subject. Even when it's a stylized look, we're still studying. We study everything. For the blimp, I had to do a lot of studying. We even studied things such as aviation lights for this. It's a very, very small aspect of the scene, but it was important to the client that we had correct aviation lights, because there are different lights from the left and the right side on an aircraft. I studied World War II blimps. I studied close-up images of what the fabric looks like that creates the main body of a blimp. The problem was they wanted it to look like it deflated, when in reality, these things are very solid and very rigid. The material is very, very thick, and it's not fabric-like at all. It's more metal-like. So studying what those materials look like is very important to be able to reproduce them in a CG scene. It trains you to develop your interest in literally everything. What does the ground look like in a barren field? How patchy is it? All of these things, because at a certain point, this ground here transitions to a CG ground. It's no longer real ground. These people here are real. The people in the background are not real. People down here by the blimp, those are not real people. So we've got to figure out, how can we make this look real and integrate it into the real scene? It's all done through a lot of studying. We study the light direction that's coming down. We use the people as reference to see the direction of the light that's coming in order to make the whole scene feel cohesive. Look Dev is a blend of art and technology. So I showed briefly some of the very painterly looking assets that have a lot of hand painting detail in them. And then we have the shaders, which are very, very technical. So when I talked about the problem solving, that was using a technical fix in order to do that problem solving in that case. That was using the shader in order to get the deformation on the blimp. That was a technical fix to what is really an artistic field. Here, this is a program that I use very frequently. This is Substance Painter. So this is kind of really the blend of art and technology right here for the painting side. And we can see I've done the wood already for this wagon, and I've gone through and I've carefully gotten the direction of the wood grain correct, just like I was talking about with the table. Everything was studied in order to make it feel like wood, even though this is a stylized wagon. It's utilizing how would the wood be in real life, even though we are shifting it and making it feel cartoony. So look dev artists paint the textures like I was just showing and develop the shaders. So this is an example of shader development. This is using a program called Substance Designer and then integrating that material that was created in Substance Designer into a program called Maya. So Maya is really the industry standard for CG creation, it's what we call a DCC, digital content creation. So this is how we make a lot of animation. However, there are more programs than this, but this is bringing in that material into Maya and then using that to create the shader properties. So again, this is an example of a velvet shader. So I do a lot of fabrics and that sort of thing. Any sort of material you can think of, that is what we have to do as look development artists. We have to be able to create those materials in a CG program. So this is working directly with the shaders there. This is what the shaders look like. If I could just back up really quick. This is a very simplified shader right here, but this is the main shader, which applies to the model. So the grayscale model, which I showed at the beginning, the character that was all gray, we would then apply the shader, which then drives how the light interacts with it and applies the texture to the surface. So some programs that are currently in use, which I talked about just briefly, Maya is very, very commonly used for a lot of different productions. It's used in animation, in VFX, in commercials. It is less commonly used in games, but it is used in games sometimes. It used to be 3D Studio Max was the only program used in games, but there has been a lot of crossover in the last few years. Blender has also really taken a foothold because Blender is actually free to use. You can download Blender for free and use it to model and texture yourself and make your own renders. Blender is an awesome program and has really gained a lot of momentum. ZBrush is a really fun to use program. It is actually a 2D, 3D hybrid. It's what's called 2.5D. It's used for sculpting assets. So what we would do is let's use the raptors for an example. The raptors are a grayscale model, but they have all of the skin detail, all of the little folds and reptile looking skin. A lot of that was done in ZBrush. Substance Painter, which I showed with the wagon, is an awesome program to develop the textures and develop the materials that are going to apply to the final surface. Substance Designer is great for making your own materials. Mari is also an industry standard. It is a very, very robust 3D paint package. So Mari is great for really, really big assets like big environments, that sort of thing. And then Photoshop. Photoshop has been around for many, many years, and it is still commonly used in the industry. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are more programs that we use, but these are the main group of programs. And technology changes. So it's important to be an artist first, to understand the different aspects of being an artist, to understand how to paint something in real life. All of those art skills are harder to achieve than the technology that we use to implement them in CG, because this stuff changes. When I first graduated from Noman School of Visual Effects, Substance Painter was not a thing. It was not out. We used a different program called Body Paint. You'll notice that's not even on the list. So things change and evolve. I've used programs which were a lot to learn and really high end. There was, I could go back and show really quick. This one here, Orville. So we did some really interesting, very technical things in a program called Clarice. And Clarice was an incredible program, but it's no longer, it's now removed from the ability to download it. They're no longer developing it. So things change. So it's more important to develop yourself as an artist rather than relying solely on the tools that we use to create the different assets. As a production artist, it's important to do personal work. So there are multiple reasons for this. So like I was saying earlier with needs of the show, we have to sometimes, as the artist, I'm going to say middleman, because we are doing the design from the visual development artists, and we have to make sure that our asset is achieving the standards that the executives of the show have set, or the IP holder of whatever project we're working on. It needs to hit those marks. So sometimes, because we've got to step back from our own wants and desires for an asset and serve the needs of the show, sometimes we're not able to do all of the things that we want to do and to kind of scratch that itch of the things that we want to do as an artist. So do your own work. You want to do something really different and interesting? That's great. Do it on your personal work, because personal work is great for your reel. So here I just did this really funny, weird character just because I wanted to. I wanted to do kind of a stylized painterly with tune lines. I had, a couple of different ideas, and I wanted to see how quickly could I do this project all on my own, because I also modeled it. So how far can you get on your own? It's sometimes really fun to challenge yourself that way. As a production artist, you're working on a whole team. A model is being delivered to you as a look development artist. You're not the one doing that. So it's great to kind of expand yourself and try something new and different in your own personal work. And this is an example of the different passes. So here we've got, if you look at the bottom right corner, it shows the different layers of the asset that are combining together in order to make that final look. Beauty, diffuse, emission, that's the glow. Speck is the shininess. Subsurface scattering, which I talked about briefly earlier, which is the light that penetrates the skin. All of these things combine together to create the final look. And the right education will take you far. So this is just a very small list of several schools which are great for learning CG art. I went to Noman School of Visual Effects myself. It's a fantastic school. SCAD is a great school. That's Savannah College of Art and Design. Or if you want to lean more to the technical aspect, Texas A&M is an excellent school for that. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are so many schools out there. There are some schools which are exclusively online. There is CGMA, there's Anim School, there's Animation Mentor. Animation Mentor doesn't teach look development, but it is a great school for animation. There are a lot of different options for how to learn the art of CG production. I recommend getting familiar with ArtStation. You can find so much great art and great inspiration on ArtStation. There's also people that sell certain things on ArtStation, such as models that you can texture and different materials that you can download and buy for a very low price, just a couple of dollars usually. So it's a great way to support artists and to just look at their art and see the different things that people are doing. YouTube is a fantastic resource for learning different things in CG. Technically, you could learn everything you need to know about how to make the art, at least, just from YouTube. But the only thing is you've got to know what to look for. But not to sound like a CG dinosaur, because when I went to school, we did not have the ability to just search up whatever it is we wanted to know. That was not there. We're the ones that made all of the things that are on YouTube now for everybody else to be able to search and find and answer those questions. If you hit a roadblock when you're trying to learn something, YouTube is going to be a great resource to get you unstuck from different situations. So this is ArtStation. I've just gone up at the top and searched look development, and you can see all of the different things that come up for look development, different aspects that can inspire you and the ways that you can take it. Just like I was saying earlier in the presentation, how look development can go from very painterly and stylized to hyper real. We can see that in just right here. This is all look development. So we can see very stylized to very realistic look development. For substance painter tips and tricks, I recommend following Nikie Monteleone. She posts a lot of great little helpful tidbits on using Painter. She works for Adobe and does this all the time, where she's posting little how-tos. And she even has, I'm gonna scroll down here in just a second. She has top 10 portfolio tips. So as you start to work on your direction in the industry, if you're interested in look development, there are some really great tips out there on how to develop your reel. So thanks so much for watching. That is all for my presentation. And now we can take it to comments and questions.
Thanks so much, Lauren. That was such an in-depth presentation. I feel like I learned so much. Going back to the discussion about software, we have a couple of questions in our Q&A. An anonymous attendee asks, are aspects of look development done in Houdini at all? Is it still like a 50-50 split between Maya and Houdini in the industry? What's your take on that?
Yes, definitely. I didn't add that to the list, but Houdini is definitely used. It depends on the studio and the production. So I have worked within a studio, some shows being with Houdini and some not with Houdini. So it really just depends, but it's definitely utilized. It's a great program to know. There's a lot of really cool different things that you could do with Houdini, procedural things that it's used for. So as far as it being a 50-50 split, I don't think that it is, because there are a lot of studios that don't use it at all, but it's definitely a good program to know.
Great. And also I want to plug that in 2 weeks from now, May 27th, I believe it is, our next speaker series session will be with the folks at Houdini. So if anyone is interested in learning more about how to use that program, we will have more of that to come. Speaking of software also, or technical uses of things, Jordan in the chat asks, are Toon Shades plugins with the software like Maya? Does an artist create or program? Do artists create or program shades?
Program shaders, that would be a shader writer, and that is definitely a very technical job. We would utilize a written shader. So there are lots of Toon shaders that are available. Some of the examples that I showed are the toon shader within Arnold. So Arnold ships for free with Maya, and there are toon shaders in there. So it's a matter of adjusting the parameters to get the toon look that you want. You can adjust the thickness of the line around the edge, all kinds of different adjustments that are already a part of the shader. So for look development, primarily you're utilizing existing shaders and adjusting those to work with the lighting setup that's going to be established with the show, rather than specifically writing the shader yourself.
Good to know. All right. We have another anonymous attendee in the Q&A who asks, what skills should they focus on? What skills are now necessary for breaking in? There are characters, environments, stylized, realistic, so many things. So that there are so many things that it's hard to focus on what to specialize in order to break in. Do you have any advice on that, Lorin?
Yes, that's a really good question, because honestly, it's really hard to know, because every studio has kind of a different look and a different goal. Because there is so much, I recommend picking a studio that is your goal studio and develop some things that look more like what they create. In terms of characters versus environments, I say to go for both. It is great to show both if possible. If we're looking at team size, environment teams tend to be bigger than character teams. So it is good to show environments for sure, environments and props, because entry level, you're going to be doing more of that work. It's hard to really break in and start doing characters right away. It's very rare. You would level up to that. But characters are really good to catch the eyes, to get somebody to look at your work and stay through to the end of your reel.
All right. And then Jordan asks, what about when 2D and 3D elements are in a scene? Is it the look development job to make sure all assets blend seamlessly in the scene, or is that a compositor's job?
That's a compositor's job, but we would work closely with them. So in the case of like Voltron, which I was showing earlier, where we had, anything that was mechanical was CG, but all of the human characters were 2D, all of the backgrounds were 2D. So it was a matter of what can we do on look development side to match the look as closely as possible before it goes on to being composited, so that it's as close as they can get it without having to do as much work. So there would be some back and forth or some early work in the pipeline of figuring out what does it need to look like in order to match the look that they're going for.
Great. And I wonder, Lorin, do you have any go-to practice exercises or study exercises that you've employed in the past, or that you actively do to study all of these things that you need to know, like wood grain and textures and all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, so I really enjoy making my own materials. So it's a really good practice to take a look at photos of materials, and then what can I do to recreate that? So I'll paint textures. Sometimes I'll work in Photoshop and just make a composite, sometimes from real pictures, and then learn how to tile textures. So that's a really important aspect of being a look development artist, is learning how to make tileable textures. That's something that you can look up even on YouTube on how to do it, and then practice yourself and see, what can I do to recreate this material?
Great. All right, another question in the Q&A from Brittany, who asks, hello, thank you for the presentation. What are some good habits to pursue in setting deadlines for ourselves on personal projects? Like, how long do you recommend working on painting textures and then shading for productions? Sometimes I get hung up on one part of look dev and it takes several days. So do you have recommendations for pacing? Great question.
Yes, it's a really good question. I'd say, for one thing, be gentle with yourself and understand that look development can be a lengthy process, because you might paint something or get something developed. And then when you go to render, it's just not looking the way that you envisioned or the way that you hoped. So you've got to leave some space for yourself to have time on the back end to also adjust that. It really depends on how big an asset is in terms of how much time you should allocate to texturing. For an example, in terms of what you have to do in actual CG production to get something finished, we allocate in what's called credits. So that table that I showed as an example, that would be an example of perhaps a 2-credit project. 2 days for modeling the table, 2 days for texturing and shading, and then it's going to go on to lighting. So then it's 2 days for lighting. So if you yourself are doing this personal project, you also have to light it in order for those textures to look nice. So I would say for a small asset like that, that's 4 days. That's almost a full work week. If you model it yourself, that's more than a full work week. That's 6 working days. So understand that even a smaller asset could be several days just on that part. If you're putting that into a larger scene, you've got to allocate more time for the floor and the walls. So you're looking at, for a scene, if it's an environment with several things in it, that's a couple of weeks for a project. Now you can find some tricks to shortcut that, such as using a friend's model or purchasing a model, using materials. Substance Painter, the whole Substance program has also Substance Source. And Substance Source is a great resource to go to for finished materials. So you can download free materials to get going. Community materials are ones that are created by fellow users that they have uploaded that you can use for free. These are not recommended for any sort of actual production work because those would be under copyright law. You can't just throw any sort of material on an asset and then have it used in production because somebody else owns that material. So it's fine for personal work, especially if you're going to credit the material maker and say, like, on your list of credits, this is what I used to make it. But it's a great way to shortcut the demands on your time. You can use those materials and then even make adjustments to them after the fact in order to get your start and then kind of fill in some more texture on top of it. So I know that was kind of a lengthy explanation for not just time budgeting, but how to kind of save some time.
Love that. And I guess related to that too, another attendee asked, do you recommend starting out with the black and white or monotone pieces to get better control of these skills?
Yeah, that's a great way to start. I mean, that's certainly an aspect that we do in art classes where we're doing just the tones in order to understand lighting and contrast and all of that stuff, and then fill it in later. It's definitely going to affect the final product, because how are you going to retain that moving forward in the project? Is it kind of part of the final look? That would not be how we would start for, let's say, something that's going to be very realistic or hyper real, because you would then, in order to maintain that black and white aspect, you would have to either multiply that down on top, or you would have to add your colors. So it's inherently going to be more difficult to maintain a realistic look. But if you're going for like a stylized cartoony look, that's a really great way to go about it. And you can end up with something really interesting looking in the end.
Great. Oh, and Brittany says, thank you. OMG, thank you in the chat.
Oh, you're welcome.
Lorin, looking back on, I guess, early on in your career, would you say that there were any educational trainings or like life experiences in general that have proven useful to you as now a look developer?
Yes. So I'd say being flexible with what happens once you get out of school or you're getting ready to go into school. I went to school specifically for environment creation for games. That was my major. That was my focus. That was my big goal, was I was going to be an environment artist for games. And I did that. I did that for 3 years, but then I found things shifting and different opportunities came my way. So I learned to kind of go with the flow and to go with what opportunities presented themselves. because if I tried to plan it myself, it actually did not turn out as well as what came my way naturally in life. Like if I just went with the opportunities that cropped up, it was better than what I could imagine on my own. So be flexible with what happens in the industry because there's always changes. Certain things have highs and lows. Games started to go through a dip, and I got an offer in animation, and it was a great opportunity. I hadn't planned on it. I didn't intend on doing that, but that's what came my way. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go with this and it's going to be great. And so understand that there can be changes within the industry itself. Certain aspects of it might be doing really well and others are struggling. So this is why I've also done commercials, is because we had an opportunity for a commercial. It's not what I planned on. Hey, let's do it and let's make it great. So because I've learned to be open-minded and not be rigid with what my intentions are with my career. It's good to have goals. It's very important to have goals for sure, but also understand that we're not in control of everything. And so going with what comes our way is going to be beneficial to you.
Love that. I feel like that's really parting advice in general as well. I know we're right up at time. So Lorin, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. Everyone here in the chat for joining us live. This was such a great presentation. As a reminder, this presentation has been recorded and the recording will be uploaded on BRIC's YouTube channel for you to reference anytime. So make sure to look back on Lorin's amazing resources that she's compiled for you here today. So thank you everyone again for joining us. We hope to see you for our last session of the year in a couple of weeks where we'll be diving into working with Houdini. So thank you everyone and hope everyone has a great rest of your Tuesday and week.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.